Hey everyone, I'm Hashim. Welcome back to another episode of Pushing Film. After getting the scans back from another roll of Kodak's Pro Image 100 film that I shot recently, I was reminded how much I love this film and thought it'd be time to do a little review and share it with you guys. And it's been around for a little while, but I only started shooting it around 2017. Ever since then, I've really liked it and kept it in my fridge as a good all-round budget film. And it's available in 5-packs, which makes it a good cost-effective option. It's not as cheap as some of Kodak's other budget films like Color Plus and Gold and Ultramax, but it's not as expensive as something like Portra 160 and 400. So it is still under 10 Australian dollars, which I would consider a somewhat budget film. It used to be a lot cheaper. I took a bunch of it traveling back in 2018, and you might recognize some of the shots and footage that you're seeing now if you've seen the vlogs on this channel. And it was just a great film to have when traveling overseas because it was cheap and accessible. And what I want to do is share some more images with you. And as I have been doing in these reviews, I've got a bunch of scans loaded here in Lightroom, and I've got them all organized into different categories that respond to the chapter markers that you'll see. So if you want to skip ahead to any particular section, you can feel free to do that. But first off, everyone loves nature, right? So I've got some shots of nature and landscapes and so on. So let's just take a look at those and see how this film performs. So firstly, Pro Image has great all-round colors in my findings, and because it's a 100 speed, it has low grain for a budget film. Compared to Ektar, there's definitely more noticeable grain. You can kind of see that in the sky in this image here. In general, this film has great colors. It has a nice, vibrant saturation compared to some other budget film stocks that I've seen. Combined with that relatively low grain, it can produce really nice images for landscape work where you want that extra detail, where you don't want all the detail in the actual landscape image in nature to get lost in the grain. So you can see a nice, good balance here with these landscape images of Kodak Pro Image 100 in Okinawa in this case, and in Mount Kosciuszko, taken on the Leica M4 at the time. And a lot of people compare this film to films such as Ektar and Portra, and I can kind of see why. And what I find about Pro Image 100 is that it has those vibrant blues and greens that I like in Kodak Ektar. So it's a nice balance between the two, and I can see why people look at it as being in between those film stocks. So if you're into doing landscape work on low budget and you don't want to fork out for Portra 160 or Ektar or slide film, Pro Image 100 makes a good option. And now the next category I want to go through is some general purpose and documentary stuff. And I've got an image loaded here, which again shows those really vibrant colors without being too oversaturated. So it has some of those characteristics of Ektar with the saturated blues and greens, but then some of the similarities to Portra where the warm tones have this nice luminous glow and not being overly saturated, which would make it suitable for something like portrait and skin tones, which I will touch more on in a section later down the track in the video. But for general purpose and documentary stuff, I would definitely think that this film would work great. And even if you have to shoot indoor, if you have some decent light and you're willing to open up the lens a little bit, you can get shots like this, and it has good color balance in the shadows and a fairly neutral image, which I do like about Pro Image 100. Just as I sort of flick through a few more of these general and documentary style shots, you can see that it can look pretty saturated in high contrast lighting situations like this, but if you shoot in more overcast conditions, it tones that saturation and contrast down a little bit. But if you like shooting in golden light and in golden hour, you can get some really nice results from this film. It has that nice Kodak warmth to it, whether you're shooting indoors or outdoors. So for general purpose, if you don't mind the 100 speed and you're not looking to stop down your lens too much or get high shutter speeds, I think this is a great option. Some shots that you might recognize from the vlog I posted at least a couple of years ago now, shooting with Robin from the YouTube channel The Real So Robin. And this is one of the best times I've had shooting in a short amount of time. We just happened to witness this beautiful light while these fire service guys were doing this intentional burn off, and the combination of that golden light and this dramatic scenery really worked well and looked great on Kodak Pro Image 100. Even though there might have been a little bit of underexposure in the shadows, it still holds up great with a little bit of extra grain, but nothing too bad. And with the last few travel shots here, you can see those great blue-green tones again that remind me so much of Ektar 100 without having to spend the extra money, which is why I took a bunch of this with me to Nepal in this case, where you're seeing this example from. But as we look at the last shot, we're going to move to the next section now, which is street photography. Now, not many people would shoot 100 speed film on the street, but I don't mind it. I don't find 100 speed is too low. Unless you're maybe trying to get heaps of depth of field, you're wanting to shoot at f11, f16 all the time and get high shutter speeds, I can see how this wouldn't be the most suitable, but I have had pretty good results with this film. And if you're shooting outdoor in bright conditions, you can still get plenty of depth of field and shutter speed, as with this shot here. I mean, the depth of field does start to drop off a little bit towards the back, but overall, this is a good quality yet affordable film stock if you don't want to shoot those really low budget films like Kodak Gold, where you might not get as much of a sharp image as you would on Kodak Pro Image 100. Having that decreased grain is also good if you want to retain all the detail in the scene that you're photographing. So the way I see it, if you can manage with the 100 speed of this film, it works great on the street. You don't have too many details in your images lost in the grain, and just avoid underexposure as with any color negative film if you can. However, as with this shot here, it gets a little bit muddy, and with this shot in the shadowed areas, you can see that lack of detail because the light was dropping a little bit here towards dusk. So I would generally use Pro Image 100 when I'm shooting the streets in bright conditions, such as with these shots. Something I like to do is expose for the midtones or highlights, which means the shadows will go dark and you get this really high contrast, high saturation type of result. As with these images, you can, of course, meter for the average of the scene, like with this shot here, for example, and get a little bit more detail in the shadows and a more even exposure. But if you like that effect, 100 speed still allows you to meter for the highlights or the midtones and let the shadows go very dark or almost completely black, like with this shot here. And just rounding out the last couple of street style images that I've selected. And next up, I want to show a few examples of some night shots. Now, I wouldn't use this film too much at nighttime when it comes to handheld shooting. Obviously, being 100 speed, it's not the most suitable, but if you have a fast lens, you can manage. When it comes to shooting subjects that include bright lights, such as this phone booth. So I would suggest using this film on a tripod if you're going to do some night shooting, or if you're going to do handheld shooting, just be willing to open up your aperture as fast as it goes and letting those shadows get a little bit grainy if you don't mind that. But with a bright night scene like this one, you know, f2 was more than enough in that situation. And the film does perform fairly well in artificial lights. The artificial lights do have a little bit of that yellow tinge to them. It's not quite as nice as Fuji C200 in my opinion for night shooting, but I do like it. With an example here using a flash, and generally, I think with these shots, I was using a very fast lens like the Zeiss Sonnar 50 1.5, and maybe some of them might have been with a 35 2.8. So the next category, something I alluded to earlier, was portraits on this film. This is one of the things it's actually marketed towards. If you look at the weird marketing on the packaging here, it was aimed at wedding and event photographers, and things like portraits and social events are what it was intended for as a cheaper alternative to some of the other professional films like Portra. And I've got a few examples of portraits here to show you. And one of the characteristics of Portra that it does have, and why some people call it poor man's Portra, is because it has those luminous and bright warm tones which correspond to skin tones. And it's not too saturated in the skin tones and can still handle a little bit of overexposure. It can't handle as much overexposure as something like Portra, but it still performs pretty well. Great exposure latitude, not too much contrast, but really nice vibrance and saturation in most of the colors without making skin tones look too saturated. And here's a portrait of Robin from that same shooting session that we did with him holding the Leica M6 there, and with the side lit situation as opposed to when the sun had actually set. And I swapped lenses with him. I think I was using his Voigtlander, and you can see that the film looks really nice in this dusk situation. And a few portraits taken overseas or for client work such as this one just goes to show that it is a really viable alternative to Portra. If you don't want to fork out for whatever it costs for Portra these days, all the film costs are going up. So I think if you give this film enough light, either meter it at box speed or 50 would be my suggestion. You can get some really nice results with a nice fine grain structure and great colors when it comes to portraits, including the skin tones. So in conclusion, it has some of my favorite characteristics of Kodak Ektar, my favorite color negative film, including those really nice, punchy, vibrant blues and greens. I think it has a higher sensitivity to the blue and green spectrum and not as much to the warmer colors, giving you nice, bright skin tones without too much saturation, making it a great all-round film stock. Now, the only caveat is that increased grain compared to those two films is not as fine and smooth of a grain structure as either Portra or Ektar, but again, it is a lot cheaper. And all that combined, in my opinion, makes it the best budget film stock that's currently available. The price rise on films in general have made things a little bit tricky in that department, and it's great especially that this film is still available in 5-packs. A lot of the multi-packs and 3 or 4-packs of Fuji's films have been cut lately, so I think this offers the best value when you buy the 5-packs, which have been going up in price, like I mentioned, but they're still under $10 a roll, Australian dollars at the time of making this video. In the US, you can probably get it for about $6 or $7 US a roll, which I think is really good compared to the more expensive options. It might not have that same vintage or lo-fi look as Color Plus or Gold films from Kodak, but I think it's a good option as an alternative to something like Portra or Ektar, where you want that increased sharpness, better detail, a slightly more professional look without spending too much money. So if you haven't tried this film yet, I highly encourage it. Go out and try it, and I hope you get some good results with it. Thanks for watching this review. I appreciate all the support, and I'll see you in the next video.